In the 12th century, poets of Normandy and Brittany carried a legend from hall to hall. Tristan, the king's favored nephew and champion. Isolde, the Irish princess made queen by treaty. The seat of power is Cornwall, with its cliff-kept fortress at Tintagel, its harbors watching the cold channel where Irish and Cornish ships trade, quarrel, reconcile. The stakes, lineage and land, the church's law and blessing, the hush of barons who weigh their loyalties in the candlelit chamber. The legend speaks of a cup on a voyage, a promise spoken in the wind's lull, and the price paid by a crown for what two hearts chose, or could not choose, to bear. The chronicle is a braid of rumor and memory, yet within it, objects endure. A ring, a sealed letter, a key misplaced at the worst possible hour. The bell in Tintagel sounds softly at first light, a single iron note that vibrates against sea mist. In the yard below, grooms lead horses past salt-rimmed stones. The ledger clerk shakes sleep from his hands and sharpens his quill, noting deliveries, barrels of fish, bolts of dyed cloth, a small oak coffer escorted from the chapel with quiet ceremony. On the dais, Mark of Cornwall, no boy, not yet old, sits beneath a faded tapestry of saints and ships, his signet ring pressing a patient groove into the wax on every order. He is both a man and a mantle. The weight of that mantle is measured not only in tin and tariffs, but in what children will bear his name. The barons want heirs, the church wants clean lines of consent, and the coast wants peace. He needs a wife whose hand steadies both court and coast. Tristan enters like a song concluding on a harp, composed, exact. He is the king's sister's child, an orphan of storm and steel, though we need not trace the wound that once made his blood run dark and his breath go thin. He has traveled. The ink on his letters carries the scent of foreign oil, the salt of distant spray. He is prized for more than the sword at his hip. He turns phrases in two tongues, listens before he speaks, and when he bows, it is to both throne and law. Today he wears gloves the color of winter sea, and in his right hand, a sealed letter. The wax bears Mark's device, a hawk whose eye is a pinprick of light. This letter will cross to Ireland, addressed to a queen who guards her daughter like a jewel. It proposes peace. It proposes marriage. It is sober language gilded by the hope that the church will pronounce a blessing. The barons will unclench their hands, and a bed will be warmed not just by bodies but by treaty. The glove creases as he holds it. The glove will matter later. In a side chapel, where the air smells of beeswax and stone, a small procession whispers a prayer over a coffer. It is not heavy, not light. Inside, there is said to be a flask sealed beneath a ribbon, and a stamped wheel of red wax, an old mother's caution in a world that is not kind to brides. Some say it is a draught of bitter resins and sweet herbs, meant to calm tremor and heart when leaving home. Others call it a charm for fidelity, the sort of charm spoken about in kitchens and denied in chancels. Its purpose is argued, its presence is certain. The key that locks this coffer is on a plain thong of leather, kept by a maid whose careful hands have woven the princess's sash since childhood. We will see the key again. These are public hours. Lists read aloud, petitions weighed, a visiting cantor's hymn tested in the hall until the notes sit as they should. Tristan speaks when requested, and when not, keeps his counsel. He is to sail as envoy, not just for Mark, but for the reputation of Cornwall itself. Arrivals and departures line a ledger. The clerk's script is neat. One entry notes, envoy's chests, X3. Another, 2 harps wrapped in cloth. The goblet enters the record only as cup of guilt, nothing more. By afternoon, the sea throws light into the castle's narrow windows. On the lowest step of the chapel, an elderly priest warms his hands and murmurs of canon law. Degrees of kin to be monitored, consents to be spoken clearly. The church does not smile on swift unions, no matter how many bolts of Irish linen are promised in exchange. He speaks of duty and charity, He does not speak of desire. At dusk, a lantern adds its scent to the day, flame and oil, smoke and patience. Tristan receives the king's ring for the journey, not to wear, but to carry, as if the metal can carry a message better than paper can. It is wrapped in a square of folded cloth, tucked into a pocket where the glove's seam has been mended twice. The king says little. The nephew bows deeply. They each know why the other is quiet. One is sending a champion to fetch a bride. The other is carrying the order that will make public what private life will need to withstand. When the tide pulls hard enough that the moored ships creak, a sealed letter is lifted. A bell. A breath. Then Tristan walks beside men who will tie knots and make maps into miles. The courtyard empties except for a boy with a broom, whose eye catches on the coffer, the tiny wobble in its lid. He tests it with a fingertip. It is locked. He thinks of the key, swings the broom again, and makes a mark on the day's end in his own way. He hums a love song not meant for him. In Dublin's Longhouse, the winter wind tests every seam in the wall. Tapestries shake and then settle. A carved saint watches with a face uncomplicated by weather. Isolde moves the fan across her cheek, not to cool but to think, a gesture taught by her mother. Every movement signals thought in a room where men and women negotiate with their eyes as much as their voices. She has known since childhood that her marriage will be a ship and not a garden. Her mother stands beside her with a locket in which a strand of the daughter's hair lies coiled like a promise that cannot be unmade. The envoy comes not as glitter, but as respect. Tristan kneels on a floor where the rushes are new. He speaks Irish with a careful ear for vowel and pride. He offers the ring wrapped in cloth and the letter with the hawk pressed into red wax. He calls Mark of Cornwall by all his proper titles. He does not ornament them. In a place where words are weighed on scales finer than gold, restraint is admired. Behind them, at a lower bench, the maid Brangian, raised beside Isolde, closer than many sisters, keeps the coffer near her feet. She has slept, sometimes, with the thong of the key looped around her wrist, and has woken to find it indenting her skin. A pit of worry like a stone in her apron about so many things, wind, waves, men's moods, becomes focused on that coffer and its contents. It is said to be for Isolde and her husband alone. Who will hold it on the ship? Who will watch the watching? The ship is chosen. Its captain, a man who measures courage in numbers of successful returns, keeps a ledger that is more talisman than inventory. He notes Tristan's harps and Isolde's trunks, the cask of oil for lanterns, and the coffer, with a half-smile that says he has seen both faith and superstition ride with kings. On the morning they leave, the city smells of fish and iron. Bells break the air into equal parts. Oars take up the slow counting. In the press of departure, a small anomaly. The carriage that should turn left toward the public dock is directed right, toward a quieter stair cut in the quay's stone. The helmsman blinks but obeys. A scribe at the tax gate marks, "Diverted, weather, in neat hand." Weather as answer is always sufficient. At sea, voices carry strangely. A private conversation becomes a rumor. A rumor becomes a certainty when retold by men who pass rope between them for hours. Tristan and Isolde speak often, as envoy and promised queen must, about the court at Tintagel, the older king who loves good instruments and fair judgment, the barons who are sharp as knives and expect to be treated as such. She asks about the chapel's windows and how the afternoon light falls through the glass. He answers precisely, "Blue, like the shallow sea near Kinsale. Gold like bees swarming a comb." Unexceptional words, intensely noticed. Brangian keeps the coffer in the captain's cabin because the latch there holds surest. Twice she checks the thong. Once she cannot find it. The missing key sickens her. She empties her work basket and shakes out a seam. It slides from the lining like a bell losing sound, and she presses it, weeping and laughing, to her chest. She tells no one. She will tell no one that later, when the sea is like a mirror. and the sun lays a pale path. The key sits in her apron pocket like a coal, making heat from fear. The day grows peculiar. The wind rests. The sails, which earlier talked to the men as if to console them, hang. The captain beats his fist gently against the mast and smiles toward Patience. In stillness, everything is seen. A letter unrolled to reread the blessing of a queen mother. A ring turned in nervous hands on a strip of cloth. A glove set down on a coil of rope where it picks up the scent of tar and salt. Small anomalies build a lattice no one names. In the cabin, the coffer is unlocked because it must be, says Brangian to her own heart. The bride should be comforted. Crossings can bruise the soul more than horses can. What lies inside is stoppered carefully, wrapped in words. For courage, for the first night, for love. Are phrases that sound like care, and sound like hope and sound, to some ears, like command. Men and women argue for centuries afterward about this. We will not resolve it here. We will only note that the stopper has marks like teeth, which happen when someone is too frightened or too impatient. One sailor, sent to fetch fresh water, sees 2 cups on a table and a hand pass one to another. He hears laughter, not the giddy kind, but the astonished kind, and he backs away, cheeks warmed by something he does not understand. He has his own life to live. He will tell only his wife that night at the fire, and she will nod and add it to the cabinet of things that are true and not to be spoken. A clerk, keeping the ship's tally with careful pen, writes without knowing significance. 2 goblets used, cloth stained. The cloth is that little square with the ring folded in it. The stain is a bloom the color of pomegranate skin. He dips his pen, blows gently on the ink. The page dries with a whisper. Another wave scrapes the hull like a nail. A gull wheels, patient as a saint in a niche. What passes between Tristan and Isolde in those unmoving hours is the subject of 100 performances, each with a different truth. Some versions say thirst, nothing poetic. A hot day, and 2 people reaching for any cup, not knowledge, not intent. Some insist on design, that Brangian, desperate to protect her mistress from a cold union, mislaid counsel for magic in the wrong hands. Some whisper darker, that a seasoned court knew what it was doing messy human hearts, plus a draft, equals a way to carry on while claiming enchantment as shield. If that last seems cruel, remember that legends are told by those who survive their consequences. What can be said with clean hands is this. A liquid meant to be shared by bride and groom passed another way. It smelled of bitter resins and honeyed herbs. It moved across the tongue as slowly as winter light moves across a courtyard. If one believed in efficacy, it did what it promised. It joined 2 people with a vow so absolute that obedience and defiance lost their outlines. If one believed in chance, then chance found its greatest stage yet. In the narrow corridor outside, a lantern flares and settles. A step pauses. The sailor sees a glove on the floor, lifts it by its fingers. He weighs whether to knock. He does not. He goes, and the glove rides with him in his pocket. Later, when he hands it back to a man who never loses anything, someone will note that a glove has known the lines of another hand. The night deepens. Before dawn, Brangian is on her knees with the coffer open, the vial bandaged back in its cloth with trembling care. She whispers apologies as if the air can carry them backward. She knots the thong around the key until it bites. She vows to be a wall, her body, her reputation, her sleep, between her mistress and the world's punishment. She is not the only one on that ship who makes a vow that night. And yet, nothing has happened. Say some. Isolde does not change her dress. Tristan tunes his harp. The captain calls the men to haul and braces himself against the probability that nothing more than a change in the wind will solve anyone's problems. That, too, is aversion. The idea that grand things arrive without any sound at all. Arrival is always noise. Ropes thrown, shouts layered on gulls' cries, dockboards talking back to feet. But the turning point hides in quiet. It is a few hours before the harbor, a few hours after the coffer is opened, and the world has paused in a silver trance. The horizon is a line written with an unsharpened pencil. Breath slows, eyes sharpen. Tristan sets the signet ring on the table to polish it with the cloth, a habit equal parts reverence and nerves. The cloth smells faintly of oils and honey. He works the ring as sailors hum low, and Isolde watches the far edge of sea that will become Cornish land. She speaks of duty. He answers in the grammar of respect, a grammar worn smooth by use. They are two figures in a hush, and every sound is magnified. The slip of metal on fabric, the tiny crack in a seal if it is cracked, a bell in a far cove that rings without anyone to ring it. When she reaches for the goblet, it is a reflex. When he takes it from her and drinks first, it is courtesy. When he passes it back, it is what word does the legend permit? Trust or error, or the simple logic that in a life governed by obligation, sharing what is offered is a way to keep breathing. Liquid moves. Eyes meet. A ship, which moments before was a world of labor, pivots into a confessional made of wind and incense, and the beating of two hearts that do not agree to silence. Nothing of the body need be spoken. No door shuts. No curtain falls. The markers are gentler, more exact. Tristan takes a step back, as if to steady himself against a wall that is not there. His hand brushes the table, and the ring makes a soft, accusing sound when it rolls and comes to rest against the goblet's base. Isolde places her palm flat on the cloth and leaves it there, counting to 7 because her mother taught her to count to 7 when the air changes. Their voices lower into an octave reserved in any castle for conversations that end lives or begin them. He speaks first of oath. She answers with law. He says the words, a nephew owes a king, a knight owes his liege, a man owes a father when the father's name is spelled with a crown. She says the words, a daughter owes a mother, and a god, whose priests have told her what a sacrament can do and what it cannot undo. They weave their obligations like rope. Then they step over the rope. Who steps first is debated. Poems give the initiative to love. Chronicles give it to chance. This one is a legend. The legend lets silence step first. On the deck, a boy stops at the open door, hand on frame, startled by stillness. He sees enough and sees nothing. He hears the cadence of two people inventing a language in a room with so little air. He falls back into shadow and presses his ear to the wood as if the sea could etch more understanding into him. He hears a promise, not shouted, not wept. A promise said like a prayer you know how to say even when half asleep, to be true in a world that makes truth a curious luxury. The mistake that will almost expose them is small, a thing that men in halls later call only a detail, and women in kitchens murmur about as if it were a meteor's fall. When Tristan retrieves the ring, his glove catches on the goblet's rim and leaves a trace of the oils on the gold. No one should know what that means. But Brangian, entering to tidy what cannot be tidied, sees the print and knows the feel of that glove as she knows the feel of her own hair. She folds the cloth more tightly and hides the cloth in the chest under the blankets, as if cotton and down can protect souls. Near the prow, the captain leans over the map, as if map and sea will agree to a kindness. He marks their place with a fingernail and listens to the air. The wind comes back in a sigh that travels the sail and into the wood. A bell rings. The land will appear when it chooses. He smiles without joy. He has seen this look on faces before. Men returning with fortunes, women returning with children, all returning with secrets that will tax a priest for months to come. When Cornwall rises from the water like a remembered gesture, Tristan and Isolde stand with faces carefully arranged to be read correctly. He is envoy and kin. She is the future queen. A single strand of hair escapes her veil at the exact moment a gull cries. When Brangian sees it, she presses her palm to her own chest, as if to hold in everything that should not be visible. The dock receives them with the theater that welcomes any bride. A man with a horn blows it until his cheeks turn the color of winter apples. Boys run with the news up the slope. The chapel doors are propped open to let the incense out. Women lay linen on tables with hands that smooth their own hearts as much as they smooth cloth. The ledger clerk writes, "Bride arrives," in a script so careful he must stop 3 times to breathe. A curious man in the lower court notices the stamp on the wax of a small letter that accompanies the trunks. It is unfamiliar. He makes a note in a margin. This is nothing. It is a redundancy. Another note from an Irish queen to a Cornish king, though this one not written in the formal hand of officials. He tucks it back and feels the wax with a fingertip. It yields faintly. Perhaps it sat in the sun. The sun does not care what it changes. Night falls on a hall full of faces and full of duty. The king steps down from his place to greet his bride. He takes her hand, eyes kind and officer sharp. His ring gleams in the candle glow, the hawk at last at rest. Isolde bows her head and lifts it, and in that vertical motion a vow passes from private to public. The jewel at her throat is warm. The fan in her hand trembles once, then is still. Tristan stands a pace behind, as a champion should. A harp waits against the wall to be tuned for the night's song. He looks like a portrait of fidelity and courage, a composition devised by God and polished by men who tell young boys whom to become. He swallows. He breathes. He watches the goblet carried by a cupbearer to the head table, and for a moment the world is only that curve of metal. Brangin kneels in the antechamber to whisper to a saint, not to ask for forgiveness, which would imply a certainty that makes her stomach cold, but to ask for a path where none is visible. She lifts her head. The saint is wood and paint. The God he represents is a mystery she nevertheless trusts with the lives of the 2 people whose names she speaks silently. In the ritual exchange of gifts, a small thing happens that would go unnoticed in a world without consequences. A packet with softened wax slips from a basket, is caught by the edge of a table, and is pressed, again, on its seal when someone places it back without thinking. The generous heat of so many candles in a hall does what the sun had begun. The wax grows weary. On its surface, faintly impressed, not that hawk, but another device appears. The mark of a mother's ring from Ireland, now doubled by the heat. Later, a clerk's eye will catch this ghost and wonder when the seal was pressed twice. The vow spoken in the chapel is clear. We will not repeat it here. It is honored by God, by the church, by every watching eye that needs the idea of permanence as much as bread. The bedchamber door closes with a sound older than law. With dawn comes the other work, inquiry. Not the crude kind of soldiers banging at shutters, but thin questions slid into conversation the way a seamstress slides a pin into blue cloth. A baron with a scar asks how the crossing was. A priest asks if the bride slept. A lady of the chamber asks if the queen prefers linen to wool, and watches the eyes that watch the queen. Tristan answers with courtesy. Isolde smiles with art. These are the tools one acquires when a life is lifted onto a dais. In the council chamber, a ledger lies open not the ships, but the castles. Someone has added a marginal note, a private habit of a man who likes complete stories. Packet seal softened, it says, followed by an initial. The steward scratches his jaw and presses a finger to the words as if that could make the wax firm again. He closes the book. The book keeps everything it has been given. Rumors work quickly when an inheritance hangs on a woman's reputation and a man's honor. A small-statured court would a man whose trade is the observation of what others miss, and whose survival depends on handing those observations to the powerful reports that he saw the champion and the queen speak with heads inclined too closely. He says it like a joke, and measures who laughs. A chamberlain, whose business is doorways, notes that the door to the queen's antechamber stuck last night, then opened softly after 2 breaths longer than custom. It is a fact that can house any interpretation. The king is not a fool. He has been loved in his life, and knows the shape of it by feel, as sailors know the wind's weight by shoulder. He also knows what law requires of him, and what the barons demand, and what the church will insist he prove or deny. He speaks to Tristan as if speaking to himself. Of weather, of maintenance on the western wall, of a hunt to be planned. He does not ask the question that would make either a liar or a ruin out of the boy he raised into a man. In legends, we let kings be less human than they were. Here, keep him human. He is trying to keep a country from breaking on a rock. Quiet investigations harden into schemes. One clerk's note in a lower chamber describes a plan that later poets will inflate into magic. Powder strewn on a floor to catch the print of feet, or a thread tied to a latch that will tremble if lifted. If this happened, we have only 2 lines to show for it, in a hand that suggests more caution than malice. If a queen's foot paused over a threshold, if a champion's sword lay between 2 bodies like a saint's staff, if a fan fell and was lifted by the wrong hand, these are stories stacked like fruit in a market where attention is the buyer, and truth is only sometimes the coin. In the chapel corridor, a confrontation with outraised voices. Brangian stands between the queen and a lady who is eager to help, to dress, to serve, to see. She thanks her and closes the door. That is all. But in the space where the door meets the jamb, a man places his palm and feels the warmth of women's whispers and confessions and knows he has no right to that knowledge. A parish priest imported to give the new queen comfort offers an admonition under the guise of blessing. Marriage is sacrament, he says, and sacrament is not simply a ring and a bed, but a covenant that binds bodies, words, and intentions. He removes his hand. Such restraint never enters songs. We must record it here. Isolde nods. Somewhere within her, vows coil around vows, and she refuses to let him see the knot they make. Much later, a theologian will write that sin depends on will. Legends answer that will depends on love. History answers that both are complicated by power. Documents collide with rumor. The softened wax's double impression is noticed again by a clerk, who brings it to the steward, who brings it to a baron, who brings it circumspectly to the king. The tiny artifact says nothing anyone can rely upon. It testifies only to warmth and handling. The barons say warmth means someone hid something. The king says warmth sometimes means the sun. The steward says linen closets can run hot when the door is closed. Everyone is in some way correct. Where is Tristan? In the field, making a show of a hunt. Because the appearance of normal procedure is what keeps men from breaking down a door. He looses a falcon and watches it become a dot in a pale sky. He thinks of a goblet. He thinks of hands. He retrieves the bird as if rescuing himself. When he returns at evening, the torch's light makes the stones look like flesh, and he cannot tell whether this comforts or warns. What of Isolde? She learns the wall's language quickly. Each passage perfumes the air differently. She could blindfold herself and know by the wax smell whether she stands near the antechamber or the library. She conducts kindnesses the public will approve, distributing alms, praising the chapel's cantor, treating an elderly servant's cough with a remedy that smells of mint and rue. In this last, the court sees a queen trained in healing as Irish queens often were, and watches her hands with gratitude tinged with curiosity. Rumors of oils and treated cloths coil around her competence, which is the old price women pay when they can help. One night, a storm tests the roofs. Rain writes Latin over tiles, and lightning finds the weather vane not worthy but willing. In the east wing, a guard swears he sees a figure moving in shadow between 2 arches, neither king nor stranger. His report becomes a list of possibilities presented at council the next morning like slices of bread. It does not become a fact. This is how statesmanship preserves itself, by offering 2 interpretations for every sighting, and then choosing the less dangerous one. The parlor confrontation many expect never comes in one piece. Instead, small questions pierce the air like needles. Because the needles are small, the fabric does not tear. As for proof ballads, love proof, signed in blood or ash, but courts do not. A glove is returned without comment. A ring is seen where it should be. The goblet is polished for a feast. A faint residue clings to instincts more than to metal. The truth is everywhere like vapor, Hands pass through it, wet, then dry. And yet the state cannot feed on vapor. A decision is needed, if only to reassure men who have to bring taxes from farms and gold from mines to the treasury without feeling they are losing their dignity. Responsibility blurs wherever love and politics touch. The king calls his council. His voice is gentle at first and then airless. He asks for courage from all present, not the courage to accuse, but the courage to arrange lives so that a kingdom will continue. It is voted, not unanimously, never unanimously, that Tristan should leave Cornwall for a while. Not exile, says the language in men's mouths. A season abroad, says the church's man, for piety and restraint. The queen remains. The marriage remains. The story pretends it is over. A bell rings for vespers. The light in the west wing looks like forgiveness when it enters under the door. The hall is quieter when boxes are packed not for celebration but for departure. The gloves are folded 2 by 2. The harp is wrapped in cloth that smells faintly of wax and wintergreen. Tristan kneels to kiss the king's ring, and then another, more human gesture pushes his body to the floor for a heartbeat longer than custom. He rises with damp eyes that he insists are from smoke. No one contradicts him. In the queen's chamber, candles burn down in synchronized sorrow. Brangian adjusts the veil. Isolde holds a sealed letter for a moment that lasts too long. The wax on this one is firm, impressed with the hawk, a message for Brittany's count whose favor Tristan will need to stay safe in a land not his. There is another letter, unsealed, folded, and folded again, that will not travel. A sheet that absorbs words like remember and if. It ends with nothing. It ends with a line the pen failed to finish, because that is how goodbyes often happen. They meet in the antechamber with a door between them and the expectation of the world. Their conversation is made of the present tense because the past is too heavy and the future too bright to look at. He asks her to keep the ring near but unseen. She says she will, and the way she says it makes the metal warmer in his palm before he gives it back. They do not touch. A priest passes down the corridor. They listen to his steps. The scent of candle wax becomes a calendar. Brittany waits with its strict cliffs and mild fields, a place where men practice patience as a craft. Tristan arrives as a guest and immediately learns how to be less than he was, so as to remain alive. He hunts when invited, plays harp when asked, gives counsel with restraint. Rumor, one kind of rumor at least, does him the courtesy of crossing the channel. A champion from Cornwall with eyes that remember something he will not say. Time does not practice kindness for long. Tristan's body gives him trouble, a wound turned inward, an old injury woke anew by weather or grief. He lies on a bed that is not his, in a chamber that smells of lavender and damp wood. The local physician, a man with calm hands, brings compresses and counsel. He speaks of oils, of herbs, not as sorcery, but as craft. Tristan nods with patience. He asks for a friend from the only place where his chest rises correctly when sleeping. He asks with what voice he has for the Irish queen who lives in Cornwall. Here the stories diverge, and we will widen the road so both may pass. Some say that in Brittany Tristan wed a lady for the sake of being civilized, a gentlewoman whose name, in some tellings, echoes the one across the sea, a coincidence that feels like a trick of memory. Their union, in these accounts, is courteous and careful, a companionship arranged to protect 2 reputations and 2 courts. Other versions say love was offered and refused politely, or accepted formally, and stowed in a chest like a marriage gift never used. We do not need to know which is more accurate to treat all parties with dignity. If there was a second Isolde in name, her interior world deserves respect, not scapegoating. What is consistent across sources is a story about sails, white or black, bright or dark, a signal from Cornwall to Brittany, but who would imagine a signal more ancient than a flag? Those who tell the legend say that Tristan, ill and at the edge of his stubbornness, asked for a way to know if Isolde of Ireland could come. The detail goes like this. If the ship returns with white, she comes. If dark, she cannot. It is a lovely simplicity, the kind legends need. Also, like legends, it refuses to account for clouds or wind. A messenger departs. A letter crosses water with a seal that melts a little in a steward's pocket near the hearth. Another clerk notes it with the care of a man who suspects that nothing is ever merely a letter. Isolde reads, the room holding its breath. She speaks to the king and to the priest. She weighs the state against the soul and makes a decision that later storytellers will collapse into one word, but which in fact took hours and tears and 5 conversations with someone who had no authority except friendship. She moves toward the harbor. The ring and the locket and the fan lie on a table like 3 versions of a self. She chooses the ring. The sea does what it always does. It takes a path between intentions and lays that path down at the speed it chooses. In Brittany, day breaks reluctantly over a bed where a man watches the door as if breath enters through hinges. A woman, call her wife, call her guardian, call her someone with a heart, sits tallest beside him and watches with him. She has been asked to look for a color and to report it. She has been asked to keep time in a way that humiliates time. She is in a story written by men who do not consider how it feels to be placed in this spot. She holds her dignity with both hands. When the ship crests the edge of the bay, there is confusion. Mist confesses nothing. The cloth that clings to the mast is not clear. It seems pale, and then dark, and then pale again, depending on how clouds shift. 2 versions branch like paths in a forest. In one, the woman speaks the truth as she sees it. I cannot tell. And the man, his chest heavy with breath like coins on a plate, dies before certainty can reach him. In the other, pain and jealousy rub together like flint. The spark is a sentence she should not say. It lands in the dry grass of a room where hope has been brittle for hours. The sentence is that the sail is dark. The man turns his face toward the wall and away from what he cannot bear. In both, death is quiet. The room hears a last breath, a bell far off, a cup settling in its place. The ship that carried Isolde of Ireland, according to the versions that cherish her speed, arrives too late to give him a breath to borrow. She walks into a chamber where candles can do nothing now but gesture. She lifts the cloth from his face and places the ring against his palm. Her hands move, as if there is still a prayer to be constructed from objects alone. Later, she lies beside him, some say with the decorum of constructed grief. Some say with the abandon of a heart that cannot be told by any canon how to stop. In all versions, what follows is a deep stillness that explains nothing and answers everything that matters. Back in Cornwall, a king hears the news and lets it hit him like a wave he refuses to curse. He orders what must be ordered. He writes letters that no one else is qualified to write. He walks the length of the chapel in steps that count his nephew's childhood and his own maturity and the 2 diverging branches of this legend's path. What happened and what people will say happened, which are not the same, and yet will live together forever in the mouths of those who must make meaning to survive. Years later, carpenters replacing warped boards in a corner of the Tintagel antechamber find a ring fallen between joists, its metal dulled to a velvet sheen from decades of dust. It bears a hawk whose eye has almost disappeared under tiny scratches. Was this the king's, misplaced? Tristan's, set aside in a moment too crowded with feeling? A servant's souvenir, tucked away to avoid suspicion and knocked loose by time? The ledger that would tell us does not. In a chest kept by a clerk's grandson, a folded letter is found, the wax softened, and upon that softness, a faint double impression, once of the hawk, again of a simpler circle that could be a mother's ring. The words inside are a modest accounting of arrivals and a private wish for health written in a margin by a woman who would not waste paper. If this is from Isolde's mother, it reads like the kind of love that carries fear as a shadow, even when kingdoms trade their sons and daughters as if they were rope or tin. On a winter afternoon in Brittany, An old woman wraps a lock of pale hair in cloth and slips it into a small locket. She does not say whose hair it is, not because she fears a judge, but because she respects a story. She has learned that the tenderest things cannot bear too much naming. She wears it until her hands are too swollen to manage the clasp, then places it into a bowl with other keepsakes, a broken mirror shard, a glove's pearl button, a bit of thread faded to almost nothing. Scholars argue with admirable energy. They track poems attributed to a Thomas or a Betrayal, weighing the words for sincerity and invention. They remind us that the 12th century loved to weave the private into allegory, and that kings and queens become symbols against their will in rooms where minstrels earn their bread. They caution us, this is a legend, stitched through with the grammar of its time. Church law, the ethics of consent, the mechanics of arranged marriage, none match our modern codes exactly. What we do, across centuries, is carry respect for the human interiors this story asks us to attend to, even while the exterior bears armor and fur and a scepter. Records versus legend. The ledgers speak of shipments and candles and seals. The legend speaks of eyes on a deck at dusk, a vow wound like blue thread around ribs. The truth likely lives in the overlap. A goblet that existed a marriage that required theater and tenderness, a nephew and a queen, who made a vow beyond the one the priest heard, whether by choice or by a draft, that removed choice and left them with only consequences to choose among. Power and tenderness shared rooms in Tintagel. A bell at dawn is the king's tool. A fan at noon is a woman's thought. A key on a thong is the thin line between good intentions and ruin. In that adjacency lies the story's ache, that a hand can hold a ring, and a scepter and a goblet, and never be sure which claiming is light and which is heavy. From the cracked varnish of a portrait on a chapel wall to a name faded in a register, what survives is what we rehearse. The shapes of duty, the shapes of love, and the shadow they cast when standing in the same candlelight. In the end, picture this: a letter's wax seal, cooling in the dark, while out beyond the window, a ship leans into wind it did not order, and a bell rolls once in the tower, satisfied that it has marked a moment no ledger truly can.